The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, Children's Health Defense. I am delighted to have here with me today Mark Crispin Miller and Amy Smiley, great friends to Children's Health Defense. And we're going to watch a trailer for a really important new film coming out called Reading the World. And it's about the work of Mark Crispin Miller on propaganda, censorship, and topics that are very close to the work of CHD. So watch it, and then I'm going to have the opportunity to discuss the film with them live here.
Democracy depends on a certain rational skepticism throughout the public. That is not a sign of pathology. That is a civic necessity. It is a journalistic requirement. It is also a basic scientific principle. You don't just accept what you're told. You look into it yourself. And if you notice problems with the story you're being given, you speak out about it loud and clear.
We're joined in our studio here in New York by New York University professor Mark Crispin Miller.
Is the sharpest critic of television we have.
He's a modern propaganda maven.
A frequent contributor to Harper's Magazine.
He is known for his writing on American media and for his activism on behalf of democratic media reform.
Henry James says the ideal critic should be someone on whom nothing is lost. And I think of Mark that way.
You closed just then by saying you're a journalist. A moment ago you said you were a commentator.
I just said you can be both.
Whether it was reading an ad or talking about a TV program, the approach was just original and exciting.
Daniel, most important shower of my life, and you switched deodorant soap.
Ads were not meant to be studied that closely or that consciously. It was understood that people would kind of tune out during commercials, kind of letting them wash over you and wash into you, right?
Not only has the TV spectacle internally become ad-like throughout, that is to say, a show like The Cosby Show is in many ways very difficult to tell apart from ads that Bill Cosby does for Jell-O. Not only have talk shows become increasingly quick and ad-like, not only have newscasts become pretty much like rock videos. In other words, not only has TV internally begun to resemble the pace and tone and so on, but all kinds of contiguous cultural forms have also become advertising vehicles.
Watch the birdie, you bastard.
As the years went by, I began to notice that there was something big happening. There was something behind all these little individual works that was more important than the works themselves.
Topic number 2, a forecast of doom and gloom in the media's future.
It became clearer and clearer that very few entities were taking control of the entire media landscape across the board.
The June 3rd edition of The Nation magazine carries a lengthy and controversial speculative article focusing on what it says could lead to the death of broadcast journalism.
One of the dangers to democracy, I would say, posed by the excessive power of media corporations on the one hand, and the lack of enough accurate information about this ownership on the other, is the resurgence of a kind of neo-fascist propaganda.
It talks about the 4 giant corporations that control the major TV news divisions, and it adds these descriptions. 2 of these 4 corporations, General Electric and Westinghouse, are defense contractors, both involved in nuclear production. No proof offered, just assertion after assertion. Joining us now is the author of that piece in The Nation magazine, Mark Crispin Miller. He is chairman of the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University. University.
The idea of the centerfold, which is so brilliant, I think it arose with Mark because he knew how powerful that would be. And that's what people had up on their walls.
But Mark's media concentration charts in the nation are not imitated. They are ripped out and posted, stolen, and reprinted.
It was perfectly okay for me to subject a particular TV commercial to close reading, right? That didn't really threaten any interests. But once you start encouraging people to think critically about subjects that have been deemed taboo by what we have now come to call the deep state, once you do that, you become a sort of unperson.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column. This is a state both campaigns desperately wanted to win.
All right, what's the problem with voting? Voting machines, the voting machines.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column.
These voting machines, which were mandated to be used in every state by the White House and the Congress through the Help America Vote Act.
George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States.
But the fact is, the two largest companies that make these machines are owned by Bush Republicans.
At 18 minutes past 2 o'clock Eastern Time, CNN declares that George Walker Bush has won Florida's 25 electoral votes.
Did the GOP steal the last election?
When I wrote my book, Fooled Again.
For the star this evening is Mark Crispin Miller.
My reputation changed radically.
He is the author of this book here, which I want to show up on the camera. Yeah, Fooled Again, How the Right Stole the 2004 Election.
When he tried to write about election theft, nobody wanted to hear it. And Harper's accepted an article with great trepidation and a lot of fact-checking.
The left press attacked me as a conspiracy theorist.
You're throwing conspiracy theorist around whenever someone says, was the election stolen?
We've had election fraud in the United States for a very long time, and both parties have committed it. You know, did I mention that I'm from Chicago? I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, but it seems to me that you shouldn't be in the movement if you don't harbor a belief in free elections. That means whoever gets the most votes wins.
There are thousands of people here. They're carrying all kinds of signs. Hail to the thief is what many of the signs read, the day that democracy's died. A lot of different sentiments being represented here. A lot of very angry people gathered.
Most are ordinary citizens who believe Trump's lie that the election was stolen.
Out of the frying pan, into the fire.
Just as I believe that free speech is not just for people who want it for themselves only, right? But who think that everybody has a right to free speech.
An NYU professor who teaches a course on propaganda told his class that there is significant evidence masks don't help prevent the spread of COVID.
Wearing 2 masks or trying to get one of those N95 medical grade masks, do you believe that that's advisable and makes a difference?
My mask, gloves, soap, scrubs, mask, gloves, soap, scrubs.
One of the things that the COVID rollout has done is to create a whole new category of forbidden speech.
The vaccine.
And as soon as NYU officials got wind of that, they weren't exactly pleased.
If you raise questions about masking, you raise questions about vaccines, you even question the origins of the pandemic, you raise any questions at all, you're putting people at risk.
Professor Mark Crispin Miller tweeted that NYU was displeased that he questioned masking in his online propaganda class.
This is where I stepped in it, Jimmy.
Yes, here it comes. If you guys been wondering, what did he say? This is what he said.
I said, you got to read all the studies, right? All of them.
This is called doing your own research, and you're not supposed to do this. Even if you're a college professor, you're not supposed to read about COVID. You're not supposed to read about masks or vaccines or anything to do with the virus or anything.
My chair called and, with a kind of forced joviality, suggested that for the good of the department, I not teach the propaganda course the
Oh my gosh.
as scheduled. And as it happens, Jimmy, I have not been allowed to teach it since.
No kidding.
I can't teach it anymore at NYU.
Mark really taught us how to think independently in a way that I hadn't ever before, and I think it's something I utilize greatly to this day.
I respect the fact that he was going to open up his mouth and speak truth to power.
What I found with Mark is I found an ally. It wasn't about politics. It was really about what is the truth here.
I say this with praise. He was a heretic, and heretics challenged the, so-called conventional wisdom.
Censorship is deadly. So we have always seen Mark as a beacon in this area about both propaganda and censorship because they go hand in hand.
It's a war on people, and peace is so important, and I think in some ways that may become a cornerstone of Mark's work, which is the fact that when you try and sell people that something's an enemy, of course you're creating a conflagration, and they want us to be at odds with each other, however that can possibly be.
I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I consider myself a patriot.
If you don't learn to read the world with due awareness of history, you're asking to get screwed.
Wow, what a great trailer. Amy, you're the director. Mark, you're the center of this. This is just such a fabulous start. Amy, tell us what prompted you to want to do this at this point.
Okay, well, I'm a novelist and I'm a psychotherapist, and I naturally find that the stories and narratives of people really tell us what they're made of. And I can think of no better story than the story of Mark and his trajectory and all that he's fighting for. And in today's world, the importance of being able to read propaganda is absolutely crucial. But also on top of that, it's the fact that Mark himself became victim of propaganda, censored, canceled, and I very much wanted to understand the forces at play. Why was his take on things so threatening? So it's really an investigation into our culture at large.
Yeah. Mark, to you, so this film, to my mind, shows that you've been focused on the same issues. It's always been about truth. It's always been about rational skepticism. But obviously, the culture embraced you to a certain extent at certain times, and then you've been canceled. How do you explain this incredible shift in how you've been perceived over time?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. In the last century, I wrote op-eds for the Times, 4 or 5 of them. I was frequently invited to appear on NPR and PBS. In other words, I was deemed an edgy figure, but still acceptable in polite society. That changed dramatically when my book Fooled Again came out in 2005. This was published by Basic Books, a major house, and both they and I were very excited and optimistic because we thought, I mean, the book being very thorough and carefully researched, that it would kickstart an urgent national discussion of the state of our voting system, which happens to be the worst in the developed world. And I'm not making that up. That's been the consensus of Harvard and the University of Sydney, that is, researchers at both institutions, who publish a biannual ranking of voting systems, and the USA has been 26th out of 26.
Wow.
Well, to our astonishment and dismay, the book was blacked out. I couldn't get on any show to, I mean, this is before the days of podcasts, right? I couldn't get on any show to talk about it. We got a total of 2 newspaper reviews in second string newspapers, and one of them was a hostile review. And then the left press, as I mentioned in the teaser, while the legacy media just sort of tuned me out, the left press attacked me as a conspiracy theorist, which blew my mind.
Right.
Partly because I'd been writing for the left press for decades.
Right.
So this got me to thinking. Once I recovered somewhat from the shock of all this, I did a little research and discovered that conspiracy theory, I mean, I asked myself, why is this phrase on everybody's lips? Has this always been the case? And it took maybe 20 minutes of online research, looking at the archives of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Time Magazine, to discover that the phrase only took off in 1967. And that was the result, I found, of a concerted propaganda drive by the CIA in their memo 1035-960. Your viewers can look it up. It's online. This memo notes that the problem facing the agency is the fact that some doubters of the Warren Report were gaining traction. They were actually moving the American people to question the official story of the lone gunman. So they urged their station chiefs worldwide to use their media assets and political connections to discredit the work of these conspiracy theorists. And that's, that began the weaponization of a phrase that had only been used now and then by the American press. And as the decades have rolled by, with one sort of engineered trauma after another, the other assassinations, 9/11,
COVID.
It sort of culminated in COVID. Okay, which we'll get into in a minute. But the thing is that I unknowingly had dared to tackle a subject that had been deemed officially taboo, and I didn't know at the time, as I do now, that's the CIA. I mean, they call the shots. They tell the press what to say and what not to say. So that's when I was first canceled in 2005. I couldn't get published in any major magazine. No book publishers were interested in doing my work.
Wow.
And then I was canceled anew in 2020, as the teaser demonstrates, when I told my propaganda class that if, this was hypothetical, if they were to want to study, say, or write a paper on masking, or any aspect of COVID, their first obligation was to read all the literature on the subject. I pointed out to them that there were, at the time, some 10 randomized controlled trials that proved that masks are not effective at blocking the transmission of respiratory viruses. But I didn't tell them that that was the truth. I said, there's this body of studies that says this. There are also a number of recent studies finding otherwise. Your obligation will be, first of all, to read through that entire body of literature. All right, so this enraged a student in the class. She went on Twitter and demanded that I be fired. This led to the NBC News story that we saw a little piece of, and 2 other media hit pieces. And then a month later, my department colleagues asked the dean for a formal investigation of my conduct. They clearly wanted to get me fired. And this, no doubt, had everything to do with NYU's very close relationship with Big Pharma. So I had stepped in it again and became even more taboo than I had been before. So I've now been relegated to the wilderness of Substack.
Well, from my perspective, being called a conspiracy theorist really shows that you're over the target, and there's some phenomenal sources on Substack, which leads me to this question that there's a certain paradox that we do have so many more sources of information today, and the internet has democratized communication in theory. How do you see sort of this new communications ecosystem that we live in, and how could it have been closed down so effectively during COVID?
Well, I'll answer the second part of your question first. This was astonishing to me as a student of propaganda. This is an absolutely unprecedented development where the same propaganda drive was launched globally. Okay. Usually, historically, propaganda is the work of nations, but now it was global. And here again, we're talking about the CIA. We're talking about the military, as Bobby Kennedy notes in the last chapter of his book on Dr. Fauci. This was something really, really new and really frightening and extremely effective, and hence its fearfulness. Now, what was the first part of your question?
Well, I think the first part was just being called a conspiracy theorist means that you're really, you are over the target of where truth is most needed. And Substack is a fantastic resource. It's also still censored. We're still censored, but not in the same way that we were at the height of COVID. And so one would imagine that on the internet, with so many sources of information available, that it is possible, not easy, but it is more possible now than it was when we only had 3 networks to sort of figure out where the truth might lie. But I don't know, how do you see this new ecosystem of the internet and this much greater multiplicity of sources of information?
Yeah, great question. I mean, on the one hand, this is what I initially thought. The internet was a tremendous boon to researchers, because now entire library collections, which once upon a time you would have had to travel to consult, are now, just a few clicks away. So I was, naively optimistic about it. But over the years, and especially since COVID, it's become ever clearer that the internet and cell phones have had catastrophic effects and have actually served to help propaganda metastasize, as it were. People will read something online that enrages them, and rage is the fuel of the so-called social media. I put it in scare quotes because nothing could be more antisocial. So people are isolated. They tend to seek out voices that tell them what they want to hear, and this will press their buttons so that they become, ferociously defensive of their own position and really near homicidally hostile to anyone who disagrees. It's not like the quaint old days of letter writing when, Abraham Lincoln, for example, had did what he called hot letters. If he was angry at a general, for example, he would sit down that night and, fire off a very stern reprimand, but he wouldn't mail it. He would reread it the next morning, and more often than not, he would tear it up. That kind of constraint has its social value, It conduces to civilized discourse and conversation, whereas this cyber world is a world of division and hostility. And, it also has served to ever shorten the American attention span and so on. But with a computer in your hand, with computers in their hands, everybody now can function as they can all function as amplifiers of whichever propaganda they've swallowed. You can't. It's all or nothing. It's black or white. Either you love Trump or you hate Trump. There's no room for a nuanced conversation, which takes thought and consideration, and self-control.
Mm-hmm.
So, let me give you an example of this. The makers of propaganda, the authors, the overlords, are extremely clever. They never rest, they never sleep, and they're always about 10 steps ahead of us. But when Charlie Kirk died, there was one story throughout legacy media, and they have stuck with it despite the fact that 90% of the American people don't buy it. And that's that he was killed by a lone gunman with a trans lover and all that stuff. It's so absurd. It's so demonstrably absurd that most people have understandably looked to the internet for something like the truth. But the conversation there, I noticed quickly, was just as tightly managed, just as monotonous as the official narrative, primarily through the labors of Candace Owens. The narrative online at first became the Jews did it, Israel killed Charlie. Now she's moved on to blame Erica Kirk for his death. But that's not really, there's not much diversity there, because both narratives take for granted that he was assassinated. And I'm one of a minority of people who have studied the evidence and found it very difficult to believe that that was an authentic assassination. And speaking of propaganda, it served as a setup for Trump's 9/11 speech the next day. And I urge people to read that speech because he began it as a paean to Charlie Kirk. I mean, he was addressing a large audience of people bereaved on 9/11, and he equated Charlie Kirk's murder with what happened in downtown New York on 9/11. Then he declared war on the enemy within. Okay, so whereas George W. Bush in 2001 used 9/11 to declare the war on terror, Trump used the apparent death of Charlie Kirk to declare that he was bringing the war home. So, I see this. This is the kind of thing that we don't think of as propaganda. We don't think of events that appear to be spontaneous and natural and organic. We assume they can't be propaganda.
Right.
We have a very limited understanding of what propaganda is and what forms it can take.
Well, we're grateful for all the work that you've done, and this film. If the rest of the film is as exciting as the trailer, we will be blessed. So, Amy, you're still working on this. Tell us a little bit more about the plan for it and how we can support you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Mary. We are still in production. I still have about 15 interviews, but I plan on finishing that work by the end of the summer. And we're in a pre-editing phase, getting all our files together and selecting what we think will be the most powerful material, both archival and interview material. And then we will, in 2027, make the long feature documentary, and it will come out in 2028. That's the plan. And personally, like Mark, I think it's very important to fight for what you believe in, and I believe in this film, but I need people to fight with me, and I'm hoping that people will donate and support and help us make this possible. And by the way, we wouldn't be sitting here today were it not for CHD, which in part has made all of this possible. So we're incredibly grateful, Mary.
Oh, thank you, Amy. We are very honored to be able to support this incredibly important and worthy project. So people can go to readingtheworldmovie.com, and on that landing page, you can find a Give, Send, Go link, and you can help support this film and be part of bringing it out, because we live in this sea of propaganda, censorship, and I would add to what you were saying, Mark, false flags and a constructed event that provokes certain responses. And as you say at the end of your comments in the trailer, if you don't understand this, you can be harmed. You can really be devastatingly harmed. So,
well, you know, what you don't know can kill you.
100%. And we saw that so clearly during COVID, right? What you don't know about what's in the injection, or what the masks are doing to you, or what the distancing is doing to you, or what it's going to do to be locked down. Lots of people were killed, right? And so the only silver lining, it seems to me, Mark, is that there is more what you called rational skepticism after COVID than there was before. And that gives me hope. And I think this movie will help.
Yeah, absolutely. I was struck yesterday. I found an article noting that a significant number of conservatives are now doubting the genuineness of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
These are conservatives, you know, and this is Trump we're talking about.
Yeah.
They're so fed up with him that they're now looking back at these seeming natural events,
right.
And doubting, you know, whether they were as advertised, and that is very, very slowly. That kind of cleverness, that kind of savvy, is very slowly growing, and you know, there have to be ways to make it grow faster,
right.
And I think that this Amy's film is an excellent way to do that.
Well, we are here with you, and we will look forward to progress reports, Amy, on the film.
Yes, absolutely.
And Godspeed. And again, the website is readingtheworldmovie.com, and there you can go to Give, Send, Go to support this important.
There's a donate button. Click on it. Give us some love, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, CHD TV. It is your host, Dr. Brian Hooker. And if you see my face, then you know it's Friday and it's doctors and scientists. And I have to tell you, not all heroes wear capes. Some heroes wear scrubs. And our guest today is a hero in my mind. Not only did he develop life-saving therapeutics during COVID-19, but my family was able to use some of those life-saving therapeutics during COVID-19. Dr. Ron Elfenbein, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for carving out time. You are an emergency physician. Tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into medicine and kind of what shaped you coming into the pandemic.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Dr. Hooker. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to meet you. So I am an emergency room doctor. I trained at Johns Hopkins, and I live in Maryland. And I always kind of wanted to be a scientist. I always was fascinated with science, and I realized becoming a physician would allow me to do two things I really liked. One was science, and one was helping people. So I decided to become a doctor. And when I went to medical school, I realized that my personality just fit best with emergency medicine, and it opened a lot of doors for me. I did a lot of work with the Secret Service. I did a lot of work with NASA. I've done things that just would not have been able to do had I not gone down the pathway that I did down emergency medicine. So it really opened a lot of doors for me, and it's been a fun ride, and I enjoy what I do, and I really like helping people. And you're kind of helping people at sometimes the worst day of their lives. And I consider that an honor to be able to do that to people, to help them and, save lives, or God forbid somebody dies, be able to talk to the family and be able to, guide them through that, which is obviously crushing and difficult. But, it's an honor to be able to do that and be there for those people when that happens. So I take my job very seriously. I really enjoy it. And it's just, I don't think I could have done anything else.
I'm so thankful that you do what you do. If I can ask, because I'm a space nerd, what type of work were you doing for NASA? I've seen astronauts that have had to do medical care on themselves, so I would imagine that it would involve something like that. But
yeah. So actually, I'm a space nerd too, and I actually was a finalist for the U.S. astronaut program. I was out of 20,000 people, I was one of 200 that got a medical interview to be an astronaut. And so I came really, really close to becoming an astronaut. I didn't eventually obviously become one, but I was very close. So during medical school, I took 1 month of elective time and I moved to the Johnson Space Center. And I spent the month basically living on the campus and developing protocols for airway management in space. So basically, we wrote the protocols for managing an airway emergency on the space station and the shuttle, which obviously they're no longer flying, but at the time it was managing on the space shuttle. And then in residency, I was awarded 2 federal grants by NASA to further develop these programs, and actually have a patent pending on the work that we did, which was really fascinating and really, really interesting. And I really enjoyed it. And it's funny you say you're a space nerd, because I'm a huge space nerd, and my nephew actually works at SpaceX, so he's kind of a space nerd too. So I got a whole family of them.
that is so exciting. The pinnacle of my career was I did give a seminar once at the Johnson Space Center. And so I'm sorry, when you're comparing nerd pedigrees, I do have to say that it was, and I was wide-eyed and mystified the entire time. I was like the total, it was. I think at one point I resisted having to leave because I just wanted to stick around because it was so cool. But they didn't have to get armed guards to take me off the premises or anything like that. But a finalist in the astronaut program, that is absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
And they should definitely give you like a major award. There's got to be a wall plaque for that or something.
Yeah.
But coming in to the COVID pandemic, there were rumblings of this in December 2019, January 2020. Where was your head in this? And kind of walk us through what you developed for COVID-19 and how patients responded to it.
Sure. So I was working in the emergency rooms throughout Maryland. I had privileges at a number of hospitals, and I also owned an urgent care center, which I was the medical director of. I didn't actually work there seeing patients, but I was the medical director. Mm-hmm. And I kind of saw what was coming. I mean, I don't consider myself a genius or anything like that, but I could read the tea leaves, and I looked at the news, what was going on in China, and they were literally parking tanks with their turrets pointed into a city. And I said to myself, well, this has to be serious if they're quarantining people with tanks. And then they were bricking cities up, like actually putting bricks so people couldn't get out. And I said, well, if that's the case, there's no possible way, despite what the CDC is saying, what the FDA is saying, what the government is saying, there's no possible way this isn't coming to our shores. So I started to prepare. I started to purchase as much personal protective equipment, so-called PPE, as I could.
Right.
And I started to purchase as much testing supplies as I could. Because again, I realized what was coming, and I said, if that's the case in China, there's no way it's going to be isolated to China. And actually, I got in a fight with my wife about it because she's also a physician, but our daughter was going to be in the school play, and our parents were coming down, elementary school play, and our parents were going to come down for it. And I reached out to them, to my parents and to her parents, and I said, maybe you guys should think twice about that. And she got really angry at me. She's like, you don't know what you're talking about. The CDC said it's going to be fine, blah, blah, blah. And then literally a week later, they shut the world down and canceled the play, obviously. Because we positioned ourselves like this, we were really the only game in town for testing. And we really started to provide services that nobody else was. So in other words, if you remember at the time, like the nursing homes were basically hotbeds of death because people just couldn't get out. So I developed what we called go teams, which we would send teams, sometimes myself included, into the nursing homes where we would test everybody in the nursing homes, including the residents and the staff, so that we could isolate people and say, let's try to isolate the people who are sick so that everybody else can potentially survive this. And nobody else was doing that. The government was saying everybody in the nursing home should get tested, but they weren't providing tests and they weren't providing a means to test. So we started to do that.
Right.
And then we developed a way to test people. We call drive-up testing at our facility, where patients could drive up and we could keep them in their cars so that they wouldn't cross-contaminate each other. And, we were really innovative on that. We were on the front page of the newspaper, the local newspapers, because we were doing that, the first places to do that. And then, of course, you started to see that replicated with drive-through testing at, various facilities with big tents and stuff. But we were kind of the first ones to really do that. And then we actually developed tents. We had two-lane tents that we would drive through. We were renting space at various volunteer fire departments who were renting their parking lots, and we were driving patients through there. And then when monoclonal antibodies became available, I was a very, very early adopter, and I was very outspoken about this. I also began to start questioning the vaccine narrative fairly early on. Initially, I was very much pro the vaccine, but once I started to learn more about it, I started to question, why are we pushing this for everybody? It doesn't make any sense. Yes, the vaccine has a certain population that we would want to, use this on, but the mandate from the government was vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. That's it. Just don't talk about anything else. Just vaccinate. And I started to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. This is the only virus in the history of the world that has no natural immunity. Like, what's going on here? So I started to question that, and I started to push monoclonal antibodies because I recognized how efficacious these things were. I mean, they really were the cure for COVID. If you got COVID, they were miraculous in terms of how they could cure people.
Right.
And so I actually became the largest. My facilities, we opened up 3 monoclonal antibody infusion centers. We became the largest infusers in the state of Maryland, bigger than Johns Hopkins, bigger than University of Maryland, because I recognized the problem, which was a bureaucratic issue, and I overcame that by I set up a call center, and I said, anyone who wants to get infused, just call our number, and we'll qualify you for the infusion, and then we'll schedule you an appointment. And overnight, we were seeing, first it was 10, then it was 50, then it was 100, then it was 500 people a week that we were infusing. Then the Biden administration did something very, very curious. First, they federalized the distribution. And I began to question that because there was no problem. What you would do to get the monoclonals was you'd log into the website for your distributor and you would say, I need, 100 doses, and they would send you 100 doses. But all of a sudden, the government said, we're going to step in and now we're going to control the distribution. What that did was created artificial shortages that didn't exist the week before, but all of a sudden now you couldn't get enough of it. Then they started to use equity initiatives to determine where it was going to be distributed. And they said, well, if you remember, like Florida, for example, they had a huge outbreak and they couldn't get it. Ron DeSantis had to go out on the open market and purchase it with taxpayer dollars because the feds wouldn't give it to him. I said, this has never happened in the history of medicine where we've started to use equity as a means for, to determine distribution of a medicine, as opposed to the doctors and the patients figuring it out on themselves and or need. You may have a need in Florida, but we're going to give it to Oklahoma, or we're going to give it to Illinois, even though they don't have an outbreak in those states, which really is just beyond the pale and makes no sense whatsoever, and actually puts people's lives in danger. So I started to question that. And then come December of 2021, the Biden administration really made a catastrophic mistake. And they said, well, the 3 monoclonal antibodies we have available to us at this time, once there was an Omicron surge, and they said, once the Omicron prevalence reaches 70%, we're going to stop the program because they don't work. And I went on Fox News, I went on Newsmax, and I said, that doesn't make any sense. Why would we do that? We don't really know for sure whether the patient in front of us has Omicron, because in the US, we were only doing genetic testing on about 1% of the population. Right. So you'd have no way to know that that patient who presents in front of you has Omicron or doesn't have Omicron. And then, of course, that's the government inserting itself between the patient and the doctor, and it's taking away informed consent. Towards the end of December, they actually shut the program down, and we had to cancel hundreds and hundreds of people who were scheduled to get infused. And I went on again on Fox News and Newsmax, and I said, this decision is going to kill people. They don't know what they're doing. They're misreading the data. They're basing it all on outdated models, which have never been correct throughout this entire pandemic. And it turns out I was right, because 2 weeks later, the government came back and said, they never apologized, of course, but they said, we did misread the data. It was the prevalence was only 20%, not 70%. They misread the data by 50%, which is just, again, beyond the pale. And only the government could make a mistake of that magnitude and not be accountable for anything. And, everything was fine. We went back to infusing people once they recognized their mistake, and there was never an issue after that. But then 4 months later, completely out of the blue, with no warning, I find myself the victim of an indictment on healthcare fraud. 3 counts of healthcare fraud for patients that we saw at the clinics that I just want to make clear, I didn't actually see. We had nurse practitioners and PAs. They were saying that we were upcharging. We were charging too much, basically. In the coding, we were coding too high a level. And they never alleged that these people were not seen. They never alleged that these people didn't exist. That's typical healthcare fraud, where you're billing for stuff that you didn't actually do. I'm going to bill for patients when I'm on vacation or something like that. That's not this. They said that it ended up being 5 total counts, of which 5 patients that we billed, quote unquote, too high for. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, it's crazy on its face, because well, first of all, they didn't come after me until after I went on Fox News and Newsmax. So right. They never did any of this before I was public about my opposition to what they were doing. But then they said that we were billing too high. So okay, out of the time frame of the indictment, we had seen over 100,000 patients. They picked five. They never had a professional coder look at those 5 charts. They just had government attorneys look at those 5 charts, and they said, "Oh yeah, you're billing too high." Now, you wouldn't know that, because it's what the billing is based on what's in the chart, and the only one who can really understand that is a coder. And they never hired a professional coder. We did. We had professional coders beforehand, and then of course at trial I had professional coders look at these charts. And the professional coder that we hired as our expert witness was the president of the American Association of Professional Coders, and he said all the charts looked good. The billing was good. In fact, some of them may have been undercoded. And even the judge before the trial, the chief judge of Maryland, said to the prosecution, this looks like a case of, quote, shoot first and ask questions later. And that's exactly what this was. They did a terrible job of a quote unquote investigation. They got my name wrong on all the documents, not only misspelled, but they gave me a middle name I don't have. I've never had a middle name. My first name is Ron. It's pretty hard to get that wrong, but they got it wrong. They again, only looked at 5 charts. And the crazy part about this is each one of those counts potentially is 10 years in jail. So you're looking at 50 years in jail. And the difference between, we were billing at what's called a level 4. The difference between a level 4 and a level 3 is about $50 for each count. So you're talking about, they're going to put me in jail for 50 years for $250. A difference of opinion over $250. And that's all this is, a difference of opinion.
That is, well, this is lawfare at its absolute worst. Obviously, you struck a nerve with your First Amendment rights, and were able to speak out. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Elfenbein, you were speaking out in order to save lives. I don't think you were speaking out because you don't like Joe Biden. I think you were speaking out, and by the way, I have no idea your feelings about Joe Biden personally or politically, but you were trying to save people's lives, correct?
100%. I was very angry about this whole thing because, again, we had hundreds of people that were scheduled to be infused with a life-saving medication that everybody acknowledged this disease was deadly. I mean, they shut the world down over it. And here was the cure in my hands. We had refrigerators stocked with this stuff, and all it was doing was gathering dust because they shut the program down. So yes, I was angry as can be because people's lives were put at risk. And I actually said that on Fox News. I said, I don't know how many people are dead, dying, or in the hospital because of the stupidity of these arrogant bureaucrats. And, my personal feelings about the Biden administration don't matter because this was totally not political. I'm not a member of the AMA. I've never been a member of the AMA, but the AMA wrote an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief on my behalf, and said that the rules that the government is accusing me of breaking, the AMA helped write those rules. And they said that I didn't break them. And yet the government is still coming after me. So we went all the way to trial because I didn't do anything wrong, and I took it to trial. And the chief judge of Maryland, the chief federal judge in the state of Maryland, was my trial judge. He issued a 93-page opinion, which, to put that into perspective, the Supreme Court very rarely issues 93-page opinions. And he completely ripped the government apart and completely acquitted me. And in case the government appealed, granted me a new trial. And on their way out the door, literally as they're packing their bags right before Trump's inauguration, Kenneth Polite, who was the head of the criminal division at the time, and the Biden DOJ decided to appeal it. And now I'm facing going back to a new trial in August. And if it's okay with you, Dr. Hooker, I'd just like to read you a couple of quotes from the judge just to emphasize like what he was saying.
Yes.
He said, quote, "The evidence weighs so heavily in favor of the defendant that it would be unjust to enter judgment against him," end quote. Quote, "There can, of course, be no crimes if the defendant complied with those rules," end quote. Quote, "The government did not carry its burden and no reasonable jury could have so concluded." I mean, again, it's 93 pages of that kind of stuff. I mean, I could go on and on with more quotes, but I think you get the idea. Rod Rosenstein, who was the former Deputy Attorney General and the former U.S. Attorney of Maryland, he said the Judge Berdar's opinion, and I didn't hire him. He didn't work for me. I had nothing to do with Mr. Rosenstein. He said this sends a strong message to the leaders of the DOJ that they should be skeptical about prosecuting people for allegedly violating vague federal regulations. Sometimes it's better handled with civil enforcement. And that's what this should have been, really. 5 cases, 5 out of 100,000 patients, they found 5. And they never even had a professional look those 5 cases over. It's insane.
It seems so capricious to me that, that they would, obviously they're targeting you for your criticism of what was going on. Why did they? What would be the impetus in your mind? And I'm not asking. It might be a guess. That they would discontinue a program that was saving lives. And second part of the question, if it didn't work for Omicron, why didn't they just have somebody develop a monoclonal? It's not rocket science. Develop a monoclonal for Omicron.
Yeah, you raised 2 really good questions. So in my mind, there's a binary there. It's either nefarious intent or ineptitude, or I guess the third possibility is a mixture of those 2. And I don't know which, because look, Omicron didn't go away, right? And they allowed us to start infusing again 2 weeks later. So even if the prevalence of Omicron was 50%, or let's say it was 60%, 3 weeks later, we were still using the same drugs. Right. So what happened to this mandate that these weren't going to work? It just vanished. No one ever followed up on that.
Talk about getting jerked around. I mean, a push me, pull me, and then all of a sudden federal indictment.
Yes. And what they're supposed to do in a case like this, if they really had a problem with the billing, right? They're supposed to, by their own internal regulations, so just so you understand, when you bill when your insurance company submits a bill, you don't submit the chart. You just submit the patient's name and a bunch of codes. if the government or an insurance company wants to see that, the chart, they have to request it. It's proprietary. The government never requested the charts until after they came after me. So, what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to say, well, hey, there's some oddities here. Can we have the charts? And then they call you on the phone or they send you a letter and say, let's have a meeting and discuss this. They never gave me that opportunity. They just came at me with a sledgehammer and said, you know what? We think you're a fraudster and we're going to come after you. Now, clearly, there had to be a secondary motive there, right? And I think that motivation is pretty clear. And one other thing I didn't tell you was, again, we became the largest infuser of monoclonal antibodies in the state very, very quickly. And the federal government, the HHS, the Health and Human Services Department of the federal government, reached out to me and said, you're pretty good at this. Can we go into partnership together? We want to open up a site at FedEx Field in Landover, Maryland, where the Washington Redskins play football. And I said, absolutely. So they funded it all. I got it up and running. I ran it for a year in partnership with HHS and the Maryland Department of Health. Now, would you go into business with somebody you think is a fraudster? And then I had to convince the government that I thought that testing would be a good idea to do at the site. The government was very anti that. They didn't want to do it. And I said, well, it's a great idea because you can take somebody who's symptomatic and we test them and they have them wait in their car. And if they test positive, we take them right out of their car, put them in an infusion chair and cure them of their COVID right then and there. And they said, wow, that's a great idea. In fact, they thought it was such a good idea that became the blueprint moving forward for the entire nation. And that was my idea, my setup, my idea. That became the blueprint for the entire country. Again, would you have done that? Would you have gone into business with somebody you think is going to rip you off? Of course not.
It's all such a nightmare scenario. Let me ask, when you're brought up on criminal charges, then you have to either pay for representation or you get a court-appointed attorney. So this costs you money. I would imagine a significant amount of money, and the fact that we're a year plus into the next administration, so there are court costs that are associated with appeal. Is that correct?
Oh yes, my costs have been. I probably shouldn't go into exactly how much they are, but multiples of millions of dollars, which I didn't have and I don't have.
No.
Right. The government seems to think you're like Tony Soprano and you have money hiding in the ceiling, in the ceiling tiles. I drive a Hyundai and my wife drives a beat up Subaru. So, we're not like rolling in the money and we're not, we don't live extravagant lifestyles.
There is a give, send, go, isn't there, that people can support your case. I think I saw that in some of the notes that you sent me.
Yes, and I would ask if you can, please, to support, because the legal fees are just astronomical. And thank God my wife, I couldn't work for 2.5 years because I was defending myself. And then even after that, getting back to work was nearly impossible. So it's very hard for me to find work because, number one, hospitals will look at you like you're damaged goods. And then the insurance companies, the malpractice insurance companies say, well, you haven't worked in 2 years. We don't really want to insure you. So it's been nearly like it's a catch-22. So it's been pretty hard to get back to work.
Over $250 and 10 years per infraction. Incredible.
And the crazy part is the government never said what they thought the right level should have been, and they never said why they disagreed with the billing that we were doing. They just said it was wrong. In fact, at closing, the chief prosecutor looked at the jury and said, you may be asking yourself what the appropriate level was. He said, the good news is you don't have to know, jurors. All you have to know is he's a criminal, meaning me, and he's wrong. And then to make matters even worse, they get to go last. And they said, which is crazy because they're coming after you. You should get to go last. But they said in closing, jurors, the defense put up a bunch of charts and a bunch of things that are, just very confusing, right? It's very confusing. All these rules and these charts, and you just use your common sense. Does any of this make common sense? And of course, if we could have rebut them, the answer would have been, well, have you ever filed a tax return? You think you could call the IRS and say, well, I use my common sense. Like, you wrote these rules. Now you want people to just stop using them? Like, I followed the rules, and you're saying that we shouldn't have used the rules that you guys wrote? Like, it's very Kafkaesque, and it's a nightmare. So I don't really know what else to say. It's been a nightmare, and it's if I didn't laugh, I'd be crying hysterically. So
this
Yeah.
just seems so counter what you would expect in, the United States of America. Your impetus was saving lives. What has it been like? If you can talk to the appeal that was filed by the Biden DOJ, what has it been like since that appeal was filed? I mean, I would imagine there are court motions, and then you actually have your physical hearing. You're in court in August. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I faced a new trial in August, so
Okay.
I'm going to trial again in August, which is something I'm trying to avoid because that's why I'm going public, to try to find somebody in the
Right.
Trump administration to look at this and objectively and say, number one, does this case make any sense? And number two, is this a good use of taxpayer dollars? Because it's already been adjudicated, and the judge already threw it out. And by the way, not only did he acquit me completely and issue me a new trial in case of appeal, but I just found out a couple of months ago that the same judge was supposed to adjudicate my new trial, and he just recused himself. And I can think of only two reasons why he would do that. He was either getting pressure from the DOJ, which I highly doubt, because somebody who's courageous enough to write a 93-page opinion, I think, would tell people to pound sand if they were coming after him. Or number two, he feels so strongly that this case is so dumb and so ridiculous that he can't be objective. So he said, I'm going to recuse myself. And to your point, Dr. Hooker, about saving lives, if you look at this on par, the amount of money that what we did saving the system and the amount of lives that we saved, it's got to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of all the money that we saved by treating people, isolating people, testing people and getting them out of society so they wouldn't spread. And
Right.
then, of course, once they found out that they were infected, treating them appropriately. Hundreds of millions of dollars of savings to the system. And the thanks that you get for something like that is for the government to come after you. And just to put this into perspective, for all the work I did during COVID, our governor at the time, Larry Hogan, personally issued me a citation. He came to me and handed me a citation, thanking me for all the work that I did. The state legislature did the same thing. And the State Medical Society named me its Person of the Year, even after I got indicted. And the federal government, the thanks I got from them was a federal indictment and my life and my family's life destroyed.
This is a different administration. This is a vastly different HHS. This is dare say, a vastly different Department of Justice. And so to look at this and to see this continue, and I guess this is my part of the appeal too, is an absolute travesty. It makes no sense whatsoever. And if anything, Dr. Elfenbein and his family should be remunerated for, all the losses that they've incurred because of this lawfare. I mean, so many people have endured lawfare in the government. I mean, surely the heartstrings must be pulled there when a lifesaver is subjected, to this horrible persecution.
Yes, and thank you for saying that. I obviously I completely agree. Further down the line, I think this also, what kind of message is this sending to people for the next pandemic? Because, why would anybody in their right mind put themselves in a position like I did, where they can come after you for such, pardon my language, chicken shit nonsense? Right? I mean, this is ridiculous. On its face, it's ridiculous.
It doesn't make sense. In some ways, it does absolutely perfectly make sense, because what you were doing was competing with, a lot of other therapeutics and prophylactics that, in my mind, were much more questionable. I cut my teeth on biotech. I got my PhD in biochemical engineering. I had my own biotech company for a while I was also at a national laboratory. But monoclonal antibodies work. I mean, this is a solid therapy. There's a solid basis for, number one, embarking upon the therapy, and number two, for the success that you saw.
And the safety profile. I mean, It was unprecedented. I mean, I would say it's like an aspirin, except aspirin has way more side effects than the monoclonals do, and it's way more dangerous.
Absolutely.
The monoclonals were so safe and so effective. It's insane. And then you're talking about other quote unquote therapeutics like the vaccines, which were obviously the whole concept of the mRNA vaccine was brand new and it was untested. And, it was something that they had just basically looked like they'd come up with off the fly. Now that I find out, well, maybe not. and there's maybe some more nefarious intent there. But regardless, how you feel about the vaccine, this was something that technology, the monoclonal technology, to your point, has been around for 30 years. And we've been using it, or 20 years, something like that, a long time.
Right.
And it's safe, it's effective, we know it works. They should have been pushing that on everybody who qualifies.
Absolutely. And like I said, my family was a recipient, and we recovered. So my thanks are to you. Where can people get more information on your case?
So I have a Give, Send, Go. I don't remember the URL off the top of my head, but I sent it to you. So
we've got that information. So,
But my website is www.ronelfenbein.com. It's RONELFENBEIN.com. I have information up there. I have the Give, Send, Go, and I have my social media, so people could please follow me. And I also have a change.org petition. If people can sign that, it's free. But I think it's just one more thing we can send to the DOJ to say, look, this is crazy. Just go away. Leave me alone. Don't you have real criminals to prosecute? That's the thing that really is just crazy about this. The Biden administration for 4 years had all this horrible Epstein stuff, and they didn't do a thing with it.
Right.
They didn't release any of it. They didn't prosecute anybody. Their priority was coming after me. Like, that makes a lot of sense. It's just, the whole thing is just so absurd and so crazy. It feels like I'm a lunatic talking about, aliens coming from outer space, but this is my life.
It really is. And I have to agree with the state of Maryland, with the Governor Larry Hogan, with the American Medical Association. What you did, it was extremely laudable, and you are a hero. And so I'm so thankful for the opportunity to have you on the show.
Well, I'm so thankful that you have me. Thank you. And I appreciate your very kind words. Thank you so much. It's an honor to finally meet you, by the way.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining for this important episode. I mean, it's time to act. It's time to do. And please also spread the word so more people can know about Dr. Ron Elfenbein, what he had to sustain, and what a life-saving hero is. Have a great Friday.
All right, we are live now. Okay. Can you tell us your name, please?
It's Kate.
Okay, and how many children do you have?
I have two children.
How old are they now?
My son is 22, turning 23 soon, and my daughter is 19, turning 20 soon.
And we've called this that vaccine injury doesn't just have to be autism. Talk to us about why you feel so passionate about bringing up the other injuries that you have or see.
So my kids are older. My son was born in 2021, my daughter in 2024, kind of right in the middle of heavy vaccination. I fully vaccinated them. I never questioned anything. There was no reason to. And my son particularly, I think, was more so injured. And I only really saw it in hindsight. And he's largely healthy and strong, and my daughter would question whether he's normal, but they both seem okay. But in hindsight, when I look back, there were a lot of strange things that I think were vaccine related. My son cried inconsolably for the first 3 years of his life. I'd keep bringing him to the doctor, and they'd be saying, well, you're nursing, stop eating tomatoes, or stop eating this. And I'm thinking, this can't be normal. He would crawl around on the floor banging his head. He had chronic ear infections that went on. He was on prophylactic antibiotics every day for at least a year. I had to lay him on the floor, kneel on his shoulders to hold him down, and pour this stuff down his throat. And it didn't work anyway. He still had chronic ear infection. So I think the antibiotic, I don't know what it is that causes the problems, but this went on for so long. Ultimately, a chiropractor, we were gonna do the ear tube surgery because we had no choice. And I was at my chiropractor just kind of in tears because it's crying baby, he's banging his head. Doctors were telling me he's probably autistic. And I was just really upset. And he said, well, do you want me to take a look? And I was like, go ahead, and he felt around the back of his neck and he just kind of pressed in one spot. And he said, yeah, with the babies, sometimes they're so little, things can get clogged up. And I swear, this is the weirdest thing, but the next day he was a different baby. Whatever was clogging his ears drained, no more antibiotics since then, ever. So that problem resolved. which was good. We never did the ear tube surgery. I just called day of and said, we're not coming. So that got better. But then, you know, continued to vaccinate the normal stuff, and I noticed, like, I'd get him home from the doctor and he would just break out in hives all over for no reason. And I'd call the doctor and they'd say, oh, well, that happens. I'm like, what do you mean that happens? Why does that happen? Why not, you know? Another time he had this horrible sore, like oozing, you know, the doctor said it was some kind of like herpes type virus. Like it just, this open wound that was horrible and oozing and you know, looked like it autoimmune kind of thing. Just out of the blue, lasted for probably several months, and then eventually went away. He had, you know, weird rashes around his eyelids, and like, I've gone back to try and look at a calendar to say, like, I wish I had put in the calendar when he had this and when he had that, and kind of try to match up all these symptoms to something specific, because it just seemed like one weird kind of thing after another, after another, after another.
When did you stop vaccinating your children?
Well, they're both, they did not have any of the COVID vaccines, but you know, we live in New Jersey, and New Jersey is headquarters to, you know, almost all the big pharmaceutical companies. So New Jersey kids, I believe, are required to get even more vaccines. Like, I questioned the chickenpox one when they sprung that on us. That was required. I didn't want to do that, but had to. So they pretty much had everything except COVID. And now I've said, don't ever take another vaccine. Just don't do it.
And what do your children say about that?
I think I made them watch Vaxxed. I make them watch all the documentaries. If they don't want to, I tell them I'm going to invite your friends over and make them watch too. So they get it. I think they think maybe I'm like a little bit too worried about it, but you know, I said, you have to be your own advocate. You have to, you know, push back and ask the right questions. It's your body, and you're the one who's going to suffer the rest of your life if something goes wrong because you've, you know, just didn't ask the right questions at a doctor. I say, oh, if you don't want to, you know, get into an argument, just say, oh, I'd like to think about it.
So
give me some information.
What made you suddenly go back and look at the vaccine?
COVID.
So during COVID?
During COVID, when everything was so rushed, and I mean, it was just really, everything was just happening in such a bizarre way. I think in hindsight, COVID was almost a blessing in a way, because I think so many people became aware. When I was kind of Googling around and looking at, you know, vaccine stuff with the COVID vaccine, I kept landing on Children's Health Defense and reading more and more and seeing the documentaries, and then Epic Times, same thing. And, you know, when you start seeing all these experts who are being silenced and censored, and you see some of the data and you know, start hearing it, it really does start to make a lot of sense. So I've literally would not, my husband did get the COVID vaccine, excuse me, because he had underlying conditions, and I took a trip with a friend who turned out to have COVID, and we were sharing drinks and eating off the same fork kind of thing. And I didn't get COVID, my other friend didn't get COVID, but I was worried I was bringing it home. And so I said, I don't know, maybe you want to think about it. Now I wish he didn't, because I think he was vaccine injured. About a year, he was very sick after the shot for the weekend.
Do you know which one he got?
He got Moderna, excuse me, 2 doses. And he did get kind of one of the hotter lots. Like, I checked the how bad is my batch thing, and there were a lot of heart-related injuries with his lot. So he was sick after the vaccine. He got COVID after that, gave it to me. I was sick with a headache for like exactly 24 hours, and he was sick for 2 weeks. I didn't get vaccinated. Then about a year after he was vaccinated, he was just doing household errands, going up and down the stairs, and you know, I walked by and he's laying on the floor. And I said, what are you doing laying on the floor? And so I felt lightheaded. I said, that's not normal. You need to go get your heart checked because you were vaccinated. And he said, oh, I was just going up and down the stairs. I said, you've been going up and down the stairs for 20 years. It hasn't happened. Like, this is not normal. He did not go get checked out. But about a month ago, I brought him to the emergency room because he was feeling out of breath when he was playing with my daughter's puppy. Turns out he had a blocked artery, 95%, and had to have a stent put in. Could it be the vaccine? Could it be not? I don't know. But it doesn't seem like there's enough energy behind exploring that, right? And you hear so many people having so many problems. I mean, he's only 55, so a little on the young side for, you know, what would have been a bypass surgery years ago. Now they do a stent. I mean, there is some family history with him, so you can't kind of rule that out. But, you know, it just makes me wonder. It really makes me wonder if that exacerbated. He also had, and so from COVID, I ended up with like a little patch of what I thought was psoriasis. It came out of nowhere. I've never had an immune problem. I never get sick. Haven't even had a cold in 30 years. Now all of a sudden I have some sort of immune thing, autoimmune thing going on. That went away after about 7 months. My husband had the similar thing on his ankle. And I've seen other people with the same thing, and it just looked like a big patch of psoriasis. It was very itchy. He scratched it so badly it ended up getting infected. Then they said he had vasculitis, which I guess is the tiny capillaries kind of swelling. So he had that problem, and I thought,
he didn't have any of these problems before.
No, he didn't. So, you know, I don't know. Could all those things just be coincidental? Sure, they could, but it just seems suspect to me.
Well, thank you for coming and talking to us and telling us your story.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you 2 books of the Vax Unvax, Let the Science Speak for your children.
Oh, good. Yes,
They can
yes.
have one of those.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.